The words cut deeper than any knife. "You're a disgusting burden." In that moment, my son's icy accusation shattered everything I thought I knew about our relationship. I'm Margaret Clark, a 62-year-old widow from Cedar Rapids, and as I stood in the kitchen, the weight of his betrayal pressed down on me like a heavy fog. This isn't just a story of a troubled mother-son bond, it's a journey through heartbreak, resilience, and the quest to reclaim my life. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Because tomorrow, we'll explore even deeper truths that demand to be uncovered. The words hit me like a slap across the face. "You're a disgusting burden." My son's voice was cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of any warmth. Standing there in the dim light of our cramped kitchen, I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. The man who once called me mom, who I had raised with every ounce of love I had, was now spitting venom in my face. I'm Margaret Clark, a 62-year-old widow from Cedar Rapids, and just moments ago, my son's brutal insult reopened wounds I thought I had buried long ago. It all began that morning when I found him lounging on the sagging couch, scrolling endlessly through his phone while I washed the dishes. I had asked him to help with the house chores, but he brushed me off with a lazy wave. I told him for the 100th time that living under my roof didn't mean he could treat me like an invisible servant. That's when the storm broke loose. "You're a disgusting burden," he sneered, eyes cold and unrepentant. "I'm tired of supporting you." I clutched the sink's edge, my knuckles white, trying to steady my voice. "What do you mean, supporting me?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. My son, David, at 29, had been living here rent-free for over 2 years, and I had been quietly covering every expense, from groceries to utilities, even his student loan payments. I had hoped he'd find a job, a place of his own, but the excuses piled up like the dishes in the sink. The moment was heavy with silence before he finally admitted, "You're the one paying for my lifestyle. You think I'd survive without your money?" His words echoed in my mind, reverberating with a cruel clarity. It wasn't just the emotional weight of his disrespect, it was the financial betrayal. I had suspected something was wrong when the savings I'd painstakingly built over decades were dwindling faster than expected. But I never imagined my own son was the cause. I sank into a nearby chair, feeling the weight of helplessness press down on me. As a retired nurse, I had spent years caring for others, often putting my own needs last. Now, I was the one who needed care, emotional, financial, and spiritual. The house felt colder, emptier, stripped of the warmth that once filled it when my husband was alive. David's words had stripped away the last vestiges of security I clung to. "I don't know what you expect me to do," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I'm just trying to keep this house and pay the bills." He shrugged, a smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Maybe if you had more money, you wouldn't be such a burden." The cruelty cut deeper than any wound I had ever known. I looked away, tears pricking at my eyes. The son I raised with dreams of kindness, responsibility, and respect was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. My mind flashed back to years ago when he was a boy, full of laughter and light, making me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day and calling me his hero. Now, those memories felt like distant echoes drowned out by the harsh reality of today. Determined to understand the extent of the damage, I pulled out my bank statements from the past year. The numbers jumped off the page like a nightmare come to life. Large withdrawals, unexplained transfers, credit card debts, all linked to David's name or accounts he had access to. My heart pounded as I realized he had been siphoning off my life savings to fund a lifestyle I could no longer afford. I remembered the nights I had stayed up, worrying about the future, trying to figure out how to stretch my pension to cover both my needs and his endless demands. I had told myself it was temporary, that he would find his way eventually. But now, the illusion was shattered. The son I had nurtured was betraying me, draining my resources with cold calculation. When I confronted him with the statements, his reaction was as cold as his words earlier. "You think I'm going to let you control me with money?" he snapped. "I do what I want. You're just jealous I'm living better than you." The arrogance stunned me. How had I raised someone so selfish and ungrateful? I felt anger rising, but also a deep sadness. This wasn't just about money, it was about trust, love, and respect, things I had poured into him since the day he was born. Now, I was left grappling with a painful truth: my son no longer saw me as a mother, but as a source to be exploited. As the morning sun streamed weakly through the kitchen window, I made a silent vow. I would no longer let this continue. I owed it to myself to reclaim my dignity and protect what little I had left. But the path ahead was uncertain, shadowed by the tension that now hung thick between us. David's presence in the house felt heavier, more oppressive. Every glance, every word seemed charged with hostility. The man who once sought my guidance now mocked my efforts to set boundaries. I realized this was more than just a financial issue, it was a deep emotional chasm that had formed between us, one I wasn't sure could be bridged. Still, amid the turmoil, I held on to a fragile hope. Maybe, somehow, beneath the bitterness and anger, the son I loved was still there. But first, I had to confront the painful reality that his brazen attitude and reckless spending had pushed me to the brink. That afternoon, I sat down at the kitchen table with a ledger and calculator, determined to map out every cent lost and every debt accrued. The numbers painted a grim picture. Credit cards maxed out, loans taken without my knowledge, bank accounts drained. It was clear that David's financial exploitation wasn't a one-time lapse, it was a pattern, a betrayal that had been growing for years. My hands shook as I stared at the figures. How had I missed this? How had I let my son take from me so freely? The guilt was overwhelming. I had wanted to protect him, to give him a chance, but in doing so, I had allowed myself to be taken advantage of. I thought about calling my closest friends, maybe even a financial advisor, but the shame held me back. How could I admit that my own son was stealing my future? The fear of judgment and the stigma of family betrayal weighed heavily on my heart. As evening fell, the house grew quiet except for the ticking of the clock and the distant hum of traffic outside. I sat alone, wrestling with the storm inside me. The son I had raised as my pride and joy was now my greatest source of pain. But beneath the despair, a small ember of resolve glowed. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with confrontation, heartbreak, and hard choices. Yet, I was determined to face it head-on, to fight for my dignity and my future. Because no matter how much he tried to break me, I was still his mother, and I wasn't ready to give up on myself just yet. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and mounting dread as I pored over every bank statement, every credit card bill, every online transaction. I was determined to understand just how deep the betrayal went. I'm Margaret Clark, and with every new discovery, the weight in my chest grew heavier. David wasn't just dipping into my savings, he was draining them dry, fueled by a lifestyle I could no longer afford to support. I sat at the kitchen table one evening, the dim light casting long shadows across the paper spread before me. The numbers stared back like a cruel indictment. Charges at upscale restaurants, electronics stores, gambling sites, I couldn't believe my eyes. There were even charges from luxury clothing outlets I had never heard of. How had I missed this before? How had he managed to keep this hidden for so long? My hands trembled as I made a list of all the places where money had disappeared. I realized it wasn't just a few impulsive purchases, it was a calculated pattern of lavish spending. The more I uncovered, the more I understood the depth of his deception. David was living far beyond his means, and I was funding it all. The next morning, I confronted him again, clutching the evidence like a lifeline. "David, we need to talk," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up from his phone, eyes narrowing with annoyance. "What now?" he snapped. I laid out the statements on the table, pointing to the charges. "This isn't a mistake. You've been using my savings for your lifestyle. I won't let this continue." His smirk didn't falter. "You're overreacting. It's my money too. I'm just using what's available." The arrogance in his voice was infuriating. I felt my throat tighten. "It's not yours to take. I saved that money for retirement, for emergencies. You've been draining it for years." He rolled his eyes and stood up, towering over me. "You don't get to control me with money, Mom. I do what I want. His defiance was a punch to the gut. I realized then that this wasn't just a financial issue, it was a battle for control. He had no intention of changing, no remorse for the damage he was causing. The realization cut deeper than any betrayal. In the days that followed, I began to review old statements, tracing back through the years. The pattern was clear. This wasn't a recent development but a long-standing exploitation masked by excuses and false promises. Every time I confronted him, he would promise to pay me back or find a job, but nothing ever changed. The debts piled up, and so did his recklessness. I questioned my own judgment. How had I missed the signs? How had I allowed this to go on unchecked? I thought back to the times I brushed off my concerns, hoping it was just a phase. But denial had only made me vulnerable. One afternoon, I called my sister, Elaine, hoping for advice and support. "Elaine, I don't know what to do. David's been taking money from me for years, and I feel so foolish." I thought he was responsible, but my voice broke, and tears spilled over. Elaine's calm voice on the other end was a balm. "Margaret, you're not alone. This isn't your fault. Sometimes love blinds us to the truth. You need to protect yourself now." Her words gave me a small measure of strength. I decided to take action. I met with a financial advisor, a kind woman named Karen, who helped me assess the damage and plan a way forward. She showed me how to secure my accounts, set up alerts, and even freeze certain assets. For the first time, I felt a flicker of control returning. But the emotional toll was immense. Every step I took to protect myself felt like a betrayal of my son, yet I knew I couldn't keep sacrificing my future for someone who refused to respect me. The tension at home grew unbearable. David's hostility worsened, his words sharper, his presence more oppressive. One evening, as I tried to explain the new financial boundaries I was setting, he exploded. "You think you can just lock me out? I'm your son. You owe me." His voice was raw with anger and entitlement. I stood my ground, voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. "I owe you respect, not your reckless spending. This ends now." The confrontation left us both shaken, and I felt the distance between us widen into an abyss. Yet, I knew that if I didn't act decisively, I'd lose everything, not just my money, but my dignity and peace of mind. Amid the chaos, I found solace in journaling, pouring my thoughts and fears onto paper. Writing helped me process the hurt and plan my next moves. I realized that this was more than a financial crisis, it was a reckoning with the son I thought I knew and the man he had become. I also sought support from a local counseling group for parents dealing with adult children who struggled with responsibility. Hearing other stories made me feel less isolated. We shared pain, frustration, and hope. I learned I wasn't alone in this battle. Slowly, I began to see the situation with clearer eyes. David's behavior wasn't just selfishness, there were deeper issues at play, perhaps addiction or poor influences. But understanding didn't mean excusing. I had to protect myself first. One afternoon, I revisited the bank, determined to close accounts David could access. The bank manager was sympathetic but warned me about potential fallout. "It's your right to protect your assets, Mrs. Clark. But be prepared for resistance." I nodded, steeling myself. Back home, implementing these changes ignited a new wave of anger from David. He accused me of betrayal and abandonment, but I stood firm. I realized that reclaiming control meant accepting the consequences, however painful. During this turbulent time, I found strength in small victories, securing my finances, setting boundaries, and refusing to be manipulated. Each step was a reclaiming of my self-worth. Yet, the hardest part was accepting that this might be a turning point in our relationship. The son I loved was slipping away, swallowed by hostility and entitlement. I mourned the loss even as I fought to protect myself. Some days, I caught glimpses of the boy he once was, a kind smile, a softened word, but they were fleeting. The real challenge was navigating this new reality without losing myself. I knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with pain, but for the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope. hoped that by facing the truth, I could begin to heal and reclaim my life. And so, with trembling hands but a steady heart, I prepared to confront the next chapter of our fractured story. The atmosphere in the house had grown thick with resentment, each day feeling heavier than the last. I'm Margaret Clark, and as my son's hostility deepened, so did my despair. His brazen attitude had shifted into something more menacing, a constant barrage of verbal abuse that left me trembling and questioning how far this could go. The very walls that once held our family's laughter now echoed with bitter words and slammed doors. It began subtly, sharp remarks when I asked him to contribute to the household, sarcastic comments about my stubbornness, and snide jabs at my age and relevance. But soon, the barbs grew sharper, cutting into my self-esteem like knives. "You're such a nag," he spat one morning as I reminded him about the overdue bills. Later that day, he sneered, "Maybe if you weren't so pathetic, I wouldn't have to bail you out." I swallowed back tears, realizing that his cruelty was a shield for something deeper. I tried reasoning with him, pleading for respect and understanding, but my words bounced off a wall of bitterness. The son I had beloved was disappearing before my eyes, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Amid this emotional turmoil, a new and more alarming truth surfaced. While reviewing recent financial statements, I discovered that David's reckless spending wasn't just draining my savings, it was also linked to loans taken out against the house, loans I had no knowledge of. My heart sank as I realized he had been borrowing against the very asset I had hoped would secure my retirement. One afternoon, the bank called with news that shook me to my core. "Mrs. Clark, there's been activity on your home equity line of credit that requires your authorization," the representative explained. I listened in disbelief as she detailed several withdrawals made without my consent. It was clear that David had found a way to access funds tied to my property, further jeopardizing my financial future. I confronted him that evening, my voice trembling yet resolute. "David, what have you done? You've put our home at risk." His eyes flashed with defiance. "It's none of your business. I'm handling my own affairs." The coldness in his voice was a cruel reminder that he no longer saw me as his mother, but as an obstacle. As the days passed, I pieced together more unsettling details. The extravagant spending, the hidden debts, and now the loans, all pointed toward a secret life I knew nothing about. Whispers of friends' concerns reached me, some mentioned David's late nights, strange acquaintances, and sudden changes in behavior. One neighbor confided, "Margaret, I hate to say this, but I've seen David hanging around some shady people lately. It worries me." I thanked her but felt a pit of dread growing in my stomach. Could my son be involved in something darker than just reckless spending? The thought terrified me. I had always believed that my love and guidance would steer him right. Now, I feared he was slipping into a world I didn't understand, one that threatened to consume him entirely. I began to suspect that David's financial recklessness was tied to a possible addiction or involvement with questionable social circles. Late-night phone calls with hushed voices, sudden unexplained trips, and evasiveness whenever I asked about his whereabouts painted a troubling picture. One evening, I overheard a heated phone conversation. His voice was strained, pleading even, but the other side was cold and demanding. I caught fragments. "I need more time. I'm working on it. Please." My heart broke, realizing the depth of his struggle. Despite the fear and confusion, I knew I had to face this head-on. I reached out to a counselor experienced in addiction and family dynamics. Sitting in her office, I poured out my fears and frustrations. She listened patiently and offered a glimmer of hope. "Margaret, understanding the root cause is crucial. This behavior often masks deeper pain or dependency. But setting boundaries and seeking professional help can make a difference." Armed with this knowledge, I tried once more to talk to David, emphasizing my concern for his well-being. But he met me with anger and denial. "You don't get to dictate my life," he snapped. "I'm fine. Stop trying to control me." The rejection stung, but the counselor's words echoed in my mind. I couldn't force him to accept help, but I could protect myself and offer support when he was ready. Meanwhile, the financial damage continued to mount. I discovered late payment fees, penalties, and growing interest on debts I hadn't authorized. The future I had worked so hard to secure was unraveling before me. One sleepless night, I sat with a pile of bills and notices, tears streaming down my face. The weight of years of silent sacrifice and betrayal crushed me. How had it come to this? How had my son's reckless choices endangered not just our relationship but my very livelihood? In a moment of clarity, I decided to involve trusted friends and professionals. I confided in Elaine, my sister, who immediately offered to help. Together, we sought legal advice to understand my rights and explore options to safeguard my assets. The lawyer was direct but compassionate. "Mrs. Clark, you have options to protect yourself legally, but it will require firm boundaries and possibly difficult conversations." I nodded, steeling myself for the battles ahead. I also reached out to a financial counselor, who helped me devise a plan to manage the debts and begin rebuilding what was lost. It was a slow, painful process, but necessary. Through it all, I found unexpected strength in the support network forming around me. Friends who listened without judgment, professionals who offered guidance, and my sister's unwavering presence reminded me I wasn't alone. Yet, the hardest part remained, facing David's increasing resentment. His hostility turned to open defiance, and the cracks in our relationship widened. He accused me of betrayal, abandonment, and cruelty. "You'll regret this," he threatened one night, his voice low and dangerous. Fear mingled with sorrow as I realized that my attempts to help and protect were driving a wedge between us. But I knew that without boundaries, I would lose myself entirely. One afternoon, I found solace in a quiet park nearby. Sitting on a weathered bench, I watched the world move around me, the laughter of children and the gentle rustle of leaves offering a brief respite from the storm inside. I thought about the son I had raised, the dreams we shared, the hopes I held for him. And I mourned the loss of the relationship I had once taken for granted. But amid the grief, a flicker of determination ignited. I couldn't change David's choices, but I could choose how to respond. I could protect myself, seek help, and hold on to the hope that one day, healing might be possible. Returning home, I resolved to keep fighting, not just for my financial security but for the chance to reclaim my dignity and perhaps, in time, rebuild the fragile bonds that remained. The journey ahead was daunting, filled with uncertainty and pain, but I was no longer willing to be a silent victim. It was time to face the truth, however harsh, and take control of my life once more. The tension in the house reached a breaking point one cold evening when I finally confronted David with everything laid bare, my grief, my anger, and my desperate need for change. I'm Margaret Clark, and that night marked a turning point, a raw and painful confrontation that exposed the fractures between us like never before. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the air thick with unspoken words. I looked him in the eye, steady despite the storm raging inside me. "David, this has to stop. You've taken everything from me, my savings, my peace, my trust. I'm done being your ATM." His eyes narrowed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You think you can just cut me off? You're the one who's pathetic. You're a disgusting burden." The words hit me like a physical blow, a cruel echo of what he had said before, but this time, they fueled a fire inside me. "No more," I said firmly. "I'm taking back control. If you want help, you'll get it on your own terms. But I'm protecting what's left of my life." His face twisted with rage. "You think you can just throw me out? I'm your son. You owe me." The room seemed to shrink as his voice grew louder, anger spilling over like a dam breaking. I stood my ground, voice unwavering. "I owe you respect, not your reckless spending and abuse. You pushed me too far." For a moment, silence fell, thick and heavy. Then, unexpectedly, his expression cracked, just for a second. A flicker of vulnerability flashed in his eyes before he slammed his fist on the table and stormed out. I sat there, heart pounding, knowing this was only the beginning of a difficult journey. Determined to protect myself, I reached out to friends and professionals. I confided in Elaine, whose quiet strength became my anchor. We enlisted the help of a lawyer to explore legal safeguards for my assets and a financial advisor to help me manage the growing debts. The lawyer was clear: "You have every right to secure your finances, Margaret. But be prepared for resistance. This will be hard." I nodded, steeling myself for the battles ahead. Friends rallied around me, offering emotional support and practical advice. One friend, Susan, helped me set up new bank accounts and change passwords, ensuring David couldn't access any more funds. Another, Mark, connected me with a counselor who specialized in family conflicts and addiction. With their help, I began to rebuild the boundaries David had shattered. I froze joint accounts, canceled credit cards, and set strict limits on spending. Each action felt like reclaiming a piece of my life, but also like closing a door on the son I once knew. As I implemented these changes, David's hostility intensified. He accused me of betrayal, abandonment, and cruelty. "You'll regret this," he hissed during one volatile argument. "You think you're so strong, but you're nothing without me." The verbal assault stung deeply, but I refused to back down. I sought solace in therapy sessions, where I learned to process the pain and build resilience. I discovered that setting firm boundaries was an act of self-love, not betrayal. One evening, during a particularly tense exchange, David broke down, his defiance wavering. "I'm struggling," he confessed, voice raw and unsteady. "I don't know how to fix this." The admission was brief and guarded, but it revealed a crack in his armor. It was the first glimpse of the son I had been fighting to save. I realized that beneath the anger and denial lay a wounded soul grappling with his own demons. But his struggles didn't excuse the pain he caused me. I told him gently, "I want to help you, but you have to want to help yourself. I can't do this alone." He looked away, silence stretching between us like a chasm. In the weeks that followed, I balanced the delicate act of protecting myself while holding on to hope for his recovery. I continued therapy, leaned on friends, and fortified my finances. Each day was a battle, but I was no longer willing to be a victim. One afternoon, as I sat in my therapist's office, I reflected on the journey so far, the betrayals, the confrontations, the small victories. I realized that reclaiming control meant accepting painful truths and embracing uncomfortable realities. I was learning to stand firm, to say no, and to prioritize my well-being. The road was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of empowerment. Returning home, I found David waiting in the living room, his expression guarded but less hostile. He didn't speak, but the tension had softened, if only slightly. I didn't know what the future held, or if our relationship could be mended, but I knew I was no longer willing to sacrifice myself for a broken bond. I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the strength I had found within. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain, filled with challenges and heartbreak, but I was determined to reclaim my life, and in doing so, perhaps pave the way for healing, however fragile, to begin. Months have passed since that night when I demanded accountability and refused to be the victim of my son's reckless spending and cruelty. I'm Margaret Clark, and though the wounds still ache and the road remains rocky, I have begun the slow and painful process of healing, both financially and emotionally. After securing my finances and setting firm boundaries with David, life has settled into a tentative rhythm. Some days are harder than others, but each morning I wake with a renewed sense of purpose. I've learned that reclaiming my life means embracing self-respect and empowerment, even when the past threatens to pull me back into despair. David and I still live under the same roof, but the atmosphere has changed. The hostility has softened, replaced by a fragile, cautious distance. We no longer pretend that everything is fine, but there's an unspoken understanding that the old patterns cannot continue. Conversations are measured, and while the emotional wounds haven't fully healed, I sense the possibility of something different, something grounded in honesty, if not yet in trust. One afternoon, I sat with my journal, reflecting on the journey we have endured. The betrayal, the heartbreak, and the courage it took to face the truth. I thought about how easy it had been to put my son's needs above my own for so many years, hoping love would be enough to save us both. But love alone cannot fix everything. In therapy, I've learned to value my own well-being, to recognize the signs of emotional abuse, and to stand firm in my boundaries. I no longer feel ashamed of protecting myself. Instead, I feel proud of the strength it took to say enough. David has begun attending counseling, a tentative step that offers a glimmer of hope. He's not ready to open up fully, but the fact that he's willing to seek help is a breakthrough. It's a small sign that beneath the anger and defiance, there's still a son who wants to heal. Our conversations now occasionally touch on his struggles, the addiction, the debts, the loneliness. He doesn't expect forgiveness, and I don't pretend that the past can be erased. But we are learning to communicate without the venom that once poisoned every exchange. I've also reconnected with friends I had drifted away from during the years I focused solely on David. Their support has been invaluable, reminding me that I am not alone, and that my worth is not defined by my son's choices. Financially, the battle is ongoing. The debts remain, and rebuilding savings feels like climbing a steep mountain. But with careful budgeting and professional advice, I am making progress. Each small victory is a testament to resilience. One day, as I sorted through old photographs, I found a picture of David as a boy, bright-eyed and smiling, carefree. I held it to my chest, a bittersweet reminder of what once was and what might still be. I know the road to reconciliation is long and uncertain. There are days when the pain feels unbearable, when the memories of betrayal threaten to overwhelm me. But I have learned to lean on hope and the belief that healing is possible, even in fractured families. As I prepare for bed each night, I whisper a quiet prayer, for strength, for patience, and for the courage to keep moving forward. I tuck away the pain and hold on to the possibility of a future where love and respect coexist. I share my story not for sympathy, but to offer a beacon to others facing similar struggles. If you are reading this and feel trapped by betrayal or abuse, know that you are not alone. Seek support, set boundaries, and never lose sight of your worth. Our family may never be perfect, but we are learning to navigate the broken pieces with grace and resilience. And in that, I find a measure of peace. Tonight, as I close my eyes, I am reminded that even in the darkest storms, there is a dawn waiting to break. And with it, the promise of new beginnings. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.